Hey Ding Dongs, I'm Jamie.
I'm Richard.
And this is Explain It to Jamie, the political comedy podcast in which I, Jamie, a politically innocent but curious young man, have the complicated political happenings of the world explained to me by my fantastic friend, Richard Lamb.
Hey-o.
Hey-o, we're back.
Me, I'm like Willy Wonka for brain ideas.
Yeah, here's some candy, but it comes at a horrible cost.
That's right. Come with me and you'll see how we'll all die from global warming.
Terrifying.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's terrifying. Wait till we do the episode on feelings.
Or real live ghosts. Yeah. How you doing, Rick?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's been a couple of weeks since we were in the room together. We had to bank a couple episodes while you were in the land of the free and the home of the brave.
That's right. And they kept reminding me how free they were.
Yeah.
All the while suffering under decrepitude, poverty.
Yeah. All the while they had to literally. There's the new health insurance policy is there's literally a guy who just takes $1 out of your pocket every 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah. But by God, you're free to eat as much as you want.
Yeah.
Have a gun.
Yay.
They can do anything.
Yeah, that's right. The guns they have there now, man, they do it all.
Yeah.
There's a gun. You just shoot it at a desk and it does your taxes.
Yeah, it kills someone who's not even in the room.
Yeah, it's like that movie, The Box. Is that what it's called? The Button.
The Button. Oh, yeah.
Is that what it's called? The Button?
The sketch, the college humor sketch of it.
It's a Picnic Face sketch.
The Picnic Face sketch of it is called The Button.
The Button is the name of the movie, I think.
Is it?
Yeah. You guys know what we're talking about right now?
Yeah.
What are we talking? Can you tell us what the name of the movie is, guys? Just say it out loud. Yeah,
right.
Thanks.
It was the
Appreciate
Button.
It.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jamie, what are we learning about this week?
We're gonna learn about NAFTA, baby.
Oh shit!
Yeah, everybody's talking about it. You know,
and we really
fresh. It's happening.
True. It's so current. We almost NAFTA do it.
Oh, yep. Better to do it before and not NAFTA.
Yeah. This is gonna take a lot out of me. I think after this, I might need some nap time. Well, this was fun.
Yeah, I can't think of any more.
No. Okay. Well, why don't we throw this assembled through all three countries in North America car into high gear and drive onto free trade knowledge highway.
Excellent transmission transition. Wahoo!
Okay, so Jamie.
Yes.
What do you know about NAFTA?
Well, it's an acronym.
Yes.
National Association for Tyrannosaurus Administrators.
Close. Armies. Yeah.
Whoa.
Tyrannosaurus armies. And really, when will the Tyrannosaurus armies finally relinquish us from their cruel tyranny?
Yeah.
Ranging across North America, just demolishing everything in their path.
Yes, but maintained strictly to North America.
That's right, yeah. Because that's where they're allowed to operate because of the national authority.
Yeah. If Donald Trump wants to tear that down, build a wall, let all the Tyrannosaurus armies out.
He's like, folks, it's terrible what's happened here in Virginia. The Tyrannosauruses, they've eaten all the miners. It's very bad. But I promise we're going to undo NAFTA. NAFTA's going to go.
Yeah, bad deal. That's, in all seriousness, that's all I know about NAFTA, really. I know it's like it's an agreement in North America between.
I just want to. I want to pause. Actually, if you think of the fact that oil is just a bunch of squished Tyrannosauruses, Tyrannosauruses really are like going to kill us all.
Hey, what can I say, man? I'm a prophet.
Yeah, that's right. Their final revenge.
Yeah.
In a way, Tyrannosauruses achieved transcendence and did become beings of pure energy, just bent on our destruction. Oh my Fucking God. Stick that in your brain disk and double click it.
So Rico.
Yeah, okay. Guide me back to Earth. Bring me back, Jamie. Bring me back.
We just got nowhere to go from there.
Nope.
No.
It was too good a riff.
Too strong. Okay. So NAFTA. It's
The North.
let's be real. It's not Tyrannosaurus.
What? No, it's the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Right,
Baby.
baby.
Fucking.
So what? Okay, fine.
yeah.
So we get Canada, U.S., Mexico.
Yes.
Anybody else in there?
Nope. That's it.
Great. We're all associated by being a continent.
Yes.
And we decided to make that bond stronger by having trade that happens.
That's right. So back in the day, Jamie, when
Tyrannosaurus walked the earth.
back in the day in the 70s when Tyrannosauruses walked the earth. No, I will encourage listeners now, if you haven't already, to go back a couple episodes to our episode on neoliberalism, because this is a very parallel episode to neoliberalism. Back in the day when neoliberalism was just a glimmer in Ronald Reagan's already Alzheimer's rattled eyes, there was kind of a notion that what needed to happen was like a kind of pro-business assault on like workers' rights. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like in the 70s was when you started to see this notion that like workers had too much power, unions had too much power, the social revolutions were like happening too much too fast, and what needed to happen was like a more favorable capitalist environment for businesses. And we talked about all this on the neoliberalism episode. And the idea of a free trade agreement between all the North American countries kind of comes about during this time. It's like an idea that Reagan has, but he doesn't manage to succeed at creating it in time. Probably because his brain was just refried beans and old racist lines he had said in cowboy movies from the 1950s.
Right. So it's like the European Union, sort of.
Yeah, except it was first. The North American
follow-up question.
Yes.
Right.
So the North American Free Trade Agreement, it ends up getting signed. It comes into effect under Bill Clinton and Brian Mulroney's time in 1994. So when it comes into effect, it's
the host of Canadian Idol.
Yeah, that's right. Host of Canadian Idol. For those who don't know, Brian Mulroney's like kind of like our Reagan, more or less. You could make that comparison. And his son, who looks like this creepy
mannequin
like
version
off
of it.
version of him. Yeah, that's right. Is the host that was the host of Canadian Idol when it was on Canadian television.
What's his name? Ben Mulroney?
Ben Mulroney, yeah.
Yeah.
All this to say,
you were saying refried beans.
yeah. So there was this. So basically, NAFTA. Just before NAFTA was created in like the late 80s, there was this thing, a free trade agreement between Canada and the U.S. Called it's called CUFTA usually, even though it should be called like CUSFTA, but it's called CUFTA, the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Okay. And then that was expanded into NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and Mexico was included. There's a number of reasons.
That's nice. We included Mexico.
Yeah, and this was actually a huge deal because it was the first time in modern history that two like fully developed capitalist countries had ever signed into a free trade agreement that included a like developing country. And this is a big part of the why and how and the fallout from that is like why we are where we are today in terms of NAFTA and in terms of how we talk about NAFTA and all that stuff. But what's a free trade agreement? Well, a free trade agreement is kind of what it sounds like. It's like normally if let's go back to everyone's favorite corner of the world, the border between Jamie Stan and Richard Stan.
There's still a heavy dispute about the poop.
The poop dumping, which is you can hear the precursor to on our United Nations episode. So typically in the relationships between countries pre the era of neoliberalism, which is the era we're in now, so like in the 70s or 60s, if you made shoes in Jamie Stan and you wanted to sell them in Richard Stan, you would if I'm in Richard Stan and I'm buying shoes from Jamie Stan, I'm like the guy in my country who's trying to buy shoes from your country to sell them to people in my country.
Sure. Well, Jamie Stan is renowned worldwide for their shoe creation.
Of course. And that's intimidating for the shoemakers in Richard Stan. So the government will put a tariff on it. Now, a tariff just means it's a tax you pay to bring something in to the country from another country for trade, right? So for every pair of shoes you come in, they're going to cost like an extra 20%. I'm going to put like a 20% tariff on them.
So you're paying that or I'm paying that?
The person in my country who brings the shoes in has to pay an extra 20%. So the same shoes made in Jamie Stan and Richard Stan, the Richard Stan ones are going to be 20% cheaper just because you have to pay the extra just to get them across the border.
I
right?
see.
So that, and the reason that governments would do that was to like protect the industries of their country. So that it's like, if, for example, you guys are famed for your shoes, you can produce better shoes for cheaper because you're just good at it. But we still have all these shoemakers in our country. If you can just sell all your shoes in my country, you're gonna fuck us over, right? Like you're gonna kill the shoe industry in Richardstan.
Right.
So that's why we have a tariff. It's to create an artificial barrier in the market.
I already see what's gonna happen.
Yeah, Jamie's. This is episode 38, so like
I'm coming
you're
along.
familiar.
I understand what Donald Trump is up to.
So business people were
Yeah.
like, hey, they could basically see a huge amount of opportunity by basically getting rid of tariffs. That's like one of the main things. And then the other, that's like what a free trade agreement is. It means you get rid of the tariffs, like the duties. That's another word for them. Maybe there is a technical difference between tariffs and duties, but for our purposes, it just means a tax when you bring something across the border.
Right.
Or a service. You can also have a tariff on a service.
That gets
from one country
confusing
to
when you're
another.
talking about Jamie Stan and Richard Stan, because there's two kinds of duties that go across the border.
It's true. Oh my god. Yeah. Oh my god. We need an international arbiter to come sort this out. But basically, the thought was that there's several thoughts. The public thought, the like justification for NAFTA was that these are huge markets that are so geographically linked anyway, that have so many ties that everyone would benefit if we got rid of the tariffs and we just had literally free trade. It's what it sounds like. It's if you want to sell shoes over here, sell them over here. But then if we want to sell our stuff over there to you, we'll sell our stuff to you.
Right.
And
so NAFTA gets rid of the tariffs.
It gets rid of the tariffs.
So you don't have to pay a 20% thing to bring in something from the United States. You're just buying it for cost.
100%.
Right.
And yeah, exactly. And so, and that was kind of the notion behind things. It also applies to investment. So basically, if I'm a Canadian investor and I want to invest in a company in Canada or Mexico, I have to be treated like an American investor. You can't make extra rules for an investor from the free trade zone. That's kind of like the same thing. And the thought was that this would just increase demand for the various products everywhere, and everyone would kind of benefit slowly but surely. It would really grow the economy. It would turn almost like link the North American economy into a single functioning unit.
Yeah, it kind of turns us v the world a bit, Yeah, it makes it works to our benefit, and we all grow together.
Exactly, that's the notion.
Right.
And it's undeniable. It's undeniable that what happened was an explosion in trade between all of our countries. Like there's been a massive growth in the movement of stuff between Canada, the US, and Mexico. Much less between, obviously, this is sort of a US-centric project because the US is literally in the middle, right? And it's the biggest market of all three of us by far. So it is all kind of like in relation to the US. There is a little bit of Canada-Mexico trade, but not that much. It's kind of negligible compared to the huge amount of trade Canada and the U.S. do together, and ditto U.S.-Mexico. Now, it was kind of a significant thing that Mexico is included, because in the past, especially like with CUFTA, when it was just Canada and the U.S. in a free trade agreement, the worry is always that when you remove the barriers to trade and investment, the jobs are going to go. Right. It's like they're going to move the jobs to wherever they're cheapest. Right. But the thing is, when it was just Canada, the US, wages in Canada aren't like crazy low compared to the US. Right. So it's not like you're like, it's going to be cheaper to put a factory in Ontario than it is in Michigan. Like that's not true. Right. So people there wasn't that rhetoric and worry about it. But when Mexico is included, Mexico has way lower wages than Canada and the US. Yeah. And so even before NAFTA was ever signed into law, and obviously continuing to this day, there's always been a language of kind of like fear about losing jobs to Mexico because wages are lower there. And it's a fear that has been, somewhat borne out. You good so far? Does this all make sense?
I think so. Yeah. So when they signed NAFTA, people were concerned. People are still
always
concerned
been concerned about it. That's right.
That when the tariff goes down, just a bunch of business is going to move to Mexico because it's cheaper to manufacture and
Exactly.
And you're not paying a penalty to bring it back into your country.
Yeah, so let's talk about what's happened and is NAFTA good and like what the fuck is the deal.
Right.
It's actually insanely difficult to judge how effective NAFTA is and what it's actually been responsible for in the economy. Because an economy is a huge thing, and it's sort of unfortunate in a way to try to evaluate the metrics of NAFTA that second NAFTA came into effect, NAFTA's lifespan completely coincides with the digital revolution and also completely coincides with the explosion of China as the world's #1 exporter and like the world's fastest developing country. Right. So those two things especially, it's like anything...
It's like counting ripples.
Yeah, it's like exactly.
Like where did that ripple come from? Yeah. We have no idea.
Anything that happens in the economy can just as easily be explained by China and automation as it can by NAFTA, right? And also, comparatively speaking, again, U.S.-centric, the Canada-U.S. trade is only about 10% of America's total trade, 10 to 12%. So it's not enough of a chunk of the economy to be responsible for like any huge shift. Exactly.
Right.
So there's a lot of conflicting things.
Is there a measurable negative effect where we did ditch NAFTA?
This is a great question, Jamie.
Yeah.
So the biggest negative effect that I can think of, if all the countries pulled the plug on a free trade agreement at the same time and just didn't want to have it anymore, is mostly just that there'd be chaos for a little while things were figured out, and we'd probably have to accept a different pattern of consumption than we do now. And this is actually part of the tactics that the capitalist elite have used to preserve this kind of system of power. I haven't talked about this explicitly yet. I've hinted at it, but let's chat about it. So NAFTA and free trade agreements like NAFTA were like the first and one of the most important like salvos in the war to create this neoliberalist world that we live in now. Especially like, you know how we've talked about how like it's sort of like invisible and gigantic, and to envision a world that's different from our capitalist world is almost like impossible.
Yeah.
So stuff like NAFTA
contributes to that.
Hugely, because it like created a legal contract framework that like enshrined essentially like wealth inequality, right? And capitalism, because it gives business owners, especially like major, huge business owners and banks and shit, all of this legal freedom to move shit wherever makes the most sense for them profit-wise, but it creates no obligation to workers and the average person, right? So it's this huge legal framework in which this exact kind of neoliberal capitalism can take place, right?
So, okay. Now, I have a knee-jerk reaction to disagree with the human tater tot Donald Trump.
Right.
And he wants to dissolve NAFTA.
Right.
But from what I'm understanding here, it actually, A, might not matter, and B, actually kind of assists in what I think is beneficial to the way we live our lives and the way we consume.
You're 100% correct. It's a weird thing to think about. I actually don't think NAFTA's good.
Right.
And I think that there are lots of good reasons to think about renegotiating it specifically.
And there's who did it? Ronald Reagan? No, the guy after Ronald Reagan.
Clinton.
Yeah. I thought you said it was done in the 70s.
Sorry. Clinton ended up... Sorry, no, it was the intellectual idea started in the 70s.
Oh.
Reagan was talking about it in the 80s, and it finally happened in 94.
Right.
So Mulroney was the Canadian Prime Minister. It was negotiated under George H.W. Bush and signed by Clinton.
Oh, okay.
Bill Clinton.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, but like, yeah, like I said, anytime Donald Trump says anything, I kind of, and this is problematic, I kind of go the opposite and assume that the opposite must be better.
So let's zoom out here.
Yeah.
I think one of the major narratives in our whole world right now, across the world, you're starting to see this, is the failure of neoliberalism as an ideology and the reactions to that failure. Neoliberalism is done. It's like a zombie ideology. And it's going to kill us all if we don't do something about it. And I think people are, even if they're not intellectually aware of what all these things mean, if they can't define all of these forces and pressures, they feel deeply that society is hollow and not working and somewhat meaningless and rigged against you.
Yeah. Well, even though before we started doing this podcast, it always sort of like rattled around in my head. I'm like, everybody seems to agree that there's a great inequality in the wage gap, and that's like not good.
Yeah.
And yet, even though everybody seems to agree, it maintains.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about here with
I'm talking about
the
this.
zombie
People
ideology.
know,
people know it's
people
bad.
know it's going badly. And NAFTA, the implementation of NAFTA coincides with the exponential steepening of the inequality between the 1% and the rest. Right? The richest people in society and the average person in society. The gulf between the money that those people make is getting way steeper and bigger, and NAFTA neatly correlates with that pattern, right? Because it gave people the chance, it gave companies all these tools to maximize their profits with no obligations whatsoever to the average person. And in fact, NAFTA got used a lot as a way to dismantle workers' rights, because literally companies would say, we're going to move all our plants to Mexico unless all of you take a 3% pay cut.
Right.
And then people feeling squeezed would agree to shit like that. And the reason unions are weaker now than they were in our parents' generation is because of the power NAFTA gave to corporations.
Now, when you say 20% tariff, is that like a real number? Or is that just an example?
It's made up. Every single sector has a slightly different tariff. Right. It was like thing by thing by thing.
Well, and you hear about like Russia acts up and people put tariffs on Russia.
Yeah, so then it's like it makes it harder for them to export shit. It squeezes their businesses. That's the thinking there, right? Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to say, winding back to Donald Trump and wanting to just be against whatever he likes. So people feel like society's not working. But the thing is, like, there's two possible responses to that politically that we see. And one is like leftism. It's saying, okay, this social contract, it's like, and I think this is the correct diagnosis. Obviously, I'm a leftist. Like, if you haven't figured that out by now, maybe I don't know what to tell you.
Someone's
Yeah, maybe listen to our "What Is Communism" episode.
Yeah,
but like, yeah, so you either go, holy shit, our society's contract is way off. Like, we've allowed it to erode too much and we're in a shitload of trouble. We need to figure out a way to start redistributing things to create a world that's working for more people, or else this world's going to explode.
Right.
Or you can tap into like the visceral feeling of unpleasantness and discomfort and powerlessness that people feel as a result of this inequality and say, it's those guys' fault. Give me your money. Right. And that's what we call populism, or like reactionary politics. Right. Where it's like you're reacting and you're basically misattributing the causes of the problems for political power. Right. Or for money, for power, whatever. So that's like the Nazis. Right. The Nazis blame the Jews for the problems of Nazi Germany, when in fact Nazi Germany was being devastatingly and brutally economically punished by the West for World War I, right? They just destroyed their economy to humiliate them and teach them a lesson.
Well, that's an interesting movie. Is telling that story of the World War II, absolutely we can attribute it to Hitler, but attributing the blame game to the way Germany was treated after World War I.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, this is not a controversial opinion in like history circles and politics circles. And there was a strong German left, a German communist movement. They just fought against the Nazis for power in the 20s and 30s and lost.
Right.
Like the Nazis ended up winning. And then we saw obviously what happens when that kind of reactionary power has both like a bunch of angry people who are really poor and mad, and then unlimited political power. Like that's bad. Right? So Donald Trump blaming Mexicans
or blaming
for people's economic problems when the real problem is neoliberalism. Like it's like Mexicans are taking our jobs, right? But it's like white CEOs are moving the jobs to Mexico, right? Because that's where the cheap labor is. Mexicans are getting fucked by NAFTA too.
Right.
Like there's this is a shout out to Thomas McKechnie who wanted me to mention this, but there was there was the Mexican corn industry was destroyed by neoliberalism by NAFTA because America grows corn the best. They're just the best at it. American farmers, cheap American corn flooded the Mexican market, and Mexican corn farmers who the economic theory said would learn how to just replant a better crop and then sell that back into America, just went out of business and became poor and destitute,
Right.
with no social safety protection whatsoever. And and they started forming armed rebellions,
Right.
Like it was actually kind of extremely badass.
The Corn Rebellions.
The Corn Rebellions. No, their name was. They have a cool name. I have to look it up. Thomas texted it to me. Oh my god, it's just too cool a name to not mention. The Zapatistas.
Ooh.
Yeah. They like fought literally like an armed rebellion against the government.
Wow.
Yeah.
So why? Because it seems to me that Donald Trump, being the businessman that he is,
Right.
would like the idea of lower tax and
Right.
and a bigger marketplace to import.
And the
things
honest truth is that I think it's unlikely that he's going to scrap NAFTA completely, because it does work for the people he really is working for, right? But here's one of the weird things about NAFTA, and another one of the things that makes it hard to talk about is, in theory, NAFTA has had a net benefit to all these economies, even if it's a small one.
Right.
It's probably done slightly more good than bad. But the way that NAFTA works is, when it's working well, it creates the most efficient, kind of supply chain of goods, being like raw materials to manufacturing to consumers, right?
Sure. I
So-
mean, even the Americans making the best corn,
Right.
means we all get
better corn.
better corn.
But the way that that's going to manifest in our lives
Yeah.
is corn's going to be a little bit cheaper,
Right.
for us at the store. When NAFTA works against you, it destroys your town. Right. So
like in Mexico with these
like
corn
with
farmers.
Mexico with the corn farmers, or like in shoes. Shoes are being manufactured really cheap in Mexico now, and there was a number of towns in America where it's like the shoe plant employs 10,000 people, and then around the shoe plant that employs 10,000 people, there's like a town with
Yeah.
like shopping malls that depend on the money from the shoe plant, and those towns like basically just once that plant moved to Mexico, these towns evaporate. Families have no money. People have to retrain, and almost always they find themselves into worse jobs than the shoe job. So the thing about
Tell
NAFTA,
me about it. All the shoemakers in Jamie Stan are taking a hit every fucking quarter.
right,
Because
they're all going
Mexican
to
shoes.
yeah. But so one of the characteristics of NAFTA is that when it works for you, it's kind of invisible and small and spread across the entire economy. But when it's detrimental, it super harshly affects a super small population of people.
Right.
And that overlaps with these people Trump was appealing to, like Midwestern states.
All the auto industry.
Auto industry, big one.
Right.
Auto industry's a big one.
I just came back from Toledo, Ohio.
Right.
And it was like a ghost town. I think they make Chrysler and
Yes.
like Jeep and stuff
Yeah.
there. And it's like it's one of those stories of a town that just like grew, was like shooting up and then stopped, and
Yeah.
people left town because of property tax.
That's
and
right.
shit like that.
Yeah. So there's anger, really concentrated, small pockets of anger.
Yeah.
And that's Trump's fuel, right? So he realized he'd get big responses by railing against NAFTA. And that's kind of why it became a whipping horse for him. Like, he doesn't fucking know anything about NAFTA. Donald Trump barely knows anything about anything. Like he's not smart enough to understand NAFTA, because like it's hard to understand. It's really dense. It has all these crazy ripple effects. It's really hard to pin down exactly. It's like high level economic analysis you have to do to even start to be like, oh, I think this is responsible. Like it's not
Right.
easy. So there's no fucking way he knows more about it than you do even halfway through this episode.
Right.
Like, but at the same time, like he, I think has a good instinct for what's getting people going, and it's easy to blame NAFTA. And in fact, even through all of NAFTA's life cycle, NAFTA is such a quick trigger, easy thing to say, to blame neoliberalism in general. Like people would say, there's like an example in an article I was reading about people blaming NAFTA for stuff, where it's a quote from like the late 90s in a Christian Science Monitor or something, where they're like, and you can see the effects of NAFTA blighted towns whose factories have moved to Sri Lanka and Indonesia. It's like, no,
Right.
you're mad about globalization, but Sri Lanka and Indonesia are not
part of NAFTA.
Not in NAFTA,
Right.
But it's like, you say NAFTA, you mean neoliberalism,
Right. Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Okay. So Donald Trump is not necessarily not necessarily. He is attacking NAFTA, but not necessarily for the reason that he actually believes it's a bad idea, but more so for the idea that it's a good buzzword.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's also, I'd be remiss to not say, since Mexico has been included in NAFTA and since it changed from Canada, US to all three countries, there's always been a racist element in the anti-NAFTA rhetoric. Right. There's always been
it was good before Mexico joined.
Exactly. There's always been these immoral brown people are going to steal all our jobs, and it's so hard to separate a good faith but misguided conservative argument against NAFTA and Mexico from the racism. Right. It's all tied together. It's all in there.
Right. Oh my gosh. Okay, interesting. Yeah. So that's NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Are there any? The European Union is another free trade agreement.
Yes, and all of the ones since have been modeled on NAFTA. NAFTA was the first one that included, countries at different development levels doing this kind of big project. So the European Union is modeled on NAFTA. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is looking like it's not in great shape anymore because the U.S. pulled out and Canada's got, I don't know.
Here's a question.
Yep.
So I'm thinking now, if we let's just say we free traded the whole world,
Yeah.
If we said you can trade with any country, free of tariffs.
Yeah.
Then I would imagine, neoliberalism would go fucking nuts.
Yeah.
And we would go, oh, whoa, that's crazy. Okay, we need to invent something called tariffs. And, and inject.
We're gonna be like these fucking companies that tech companies that think they're inventing new shit. Did you hear this thing? You see it on Twitter all the time. Where Uber's introducing the new Uber Pool. It's a custom built large sized commuter vehicle that follows a preset route that you can take for cheap. And it's that's a bus.
Yeah.
You invented a bus.
You invented the bus.
Airbnb is now going to have its own buildings that are specifically for Airbnb, and someone's like, "That's a fucking hotel."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Are we going to go through a loop where we go, "Oh man, this free trade is going crazy and it's eradicating whole towns and industries, and so now we need to put in these protective tariffs."
Yeah.
And then again, we're going to go, but isn't it nice sometimes when you can just free trade between countries? Maybe these little pockets and these little slivers will have free trade.
And you're correct. And you are correct that there's a
just
risk of being this
table.
insane cycle. I think the key is you need to have as a part of your market environment, and obviously I'm skeptical of market environments being a long-term thing that you want anyway. That's a tenet of Marxist thought, is that market capitalism is a intermediate step on the way to a more equitable, more sustainable model for how people live their lives and do commerce with each other.
Marxist capitalism being socialism?
Market capitalism.
Oh, market.
So capitalism isn't supposed to be permanent.
Right.
It's a temporary measure that's designed to stimulate growth from when we were all peasants in feudal societies to modern industrial societies. And once we hit that point where we have enough
momentum
shit built that we can feed everybody and access things and everything, and our country's kind of got all this capacity, then we can create a system where everyone shares equally in things a lot more.
Move into communism via socialism.
That's the plan, right? And so I think that again, I was talking with Anthony, who's been on the show many times and who's one of our fact checker guys. Hello, Anthony.
Hey, Anthony.
And what he said, what I thought was good, was he's NAFTA is bad, but trade is good. And so in any environment, it's okay to have good environments for trading. You just have to make sure that there's a social safety net, that there's redistribution, that the average person in society is benefiting from this trading. That's what is so shitty about neoliberalism, is that even though there's more shit being built, the economies are growing, most people aren't benefiting. That's the income inequality, right? Most people are not getting a proportionate improvement into their lives. And I think that's the malaise that we can feel. We have all these fucking incredible superpower devices now. I use Siri, I bike a lot, and I use Siri voice command while I'm on my bike, and I'm one step from fucking Star Trek when I'm using Siri. You know what I mean? It's literally a fantasy.
Lose the button and we're
boom.
We're really
and they have Hey Siri now when it's plugged in, right? If I have my power bank plugged in, I can use Hey Siri.
Whoa.
Like that's fucked. Like that's crazy. It's like a superpower, and yet we're all shitty and poor, and there's the thought that like all this wealth is like just being stolen from you. We're like, even though our standard of living has kind of improved, we know that we're not going to get as big a slice of pie as our parents did in their generation.
Right.
We don't have optimism in our generation because we can feel this gulf widening, right? And so we need a world where we have trade, but we have better redistribution. We have a fairer contract for everybody.
Right. Interesting. Right? Yeah. That makes sense. And Donald Trump's probably not going to give us that.
No, he's not going to do that at all. He's going to fucking dance on a throne made of our bones.
Yeah.
like that's what he's going to do.
Right.
Let's talk a bit about what's happening right now with NAFTA.
Yeah, because it's all in the news. I find, like I said, I see articles pass through my Facebook feed daily on like little advancements. Yeah, so
Donald Trump gave formal notice that he wanted to renegotiate NAFTA. You have to give like 3 months notice. He did that several months ago. Mm-hmm. They started renegotiating in August, and it's just stalled completely. As far as I know, nobody's agreed to anything yet, and everyone thinks the U.S.'s demands are super unreasonable and kind of insane, or like it makes sense that they're the demands. They're not insane demands, but it's like, no, they're just not things we're going to renegotiate. For example, there's like right now there's like a dispute mechanism in NAFTA where like if there's a problem between two countries, you can get like an independent panel to like rule on who's right. And we have this in British Columbia where I'm from. There's this fucking thing that's literally been happening for my entire life called the softwood lumber dispute, where
oh yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah, I mean, here's just it's so boring and shitty. Like I can't believe I had to read about it again because I've been literally reading about it as long as I've been able to read the news. But basically, natural resources in Canada are public. The government owns natural resources, and in America, the land that natural resources on is private, right? So private people can own it.
Right. Whoever owns the land owns the shit on it.
Exactly. So the government, if you're cutting softwood lumber, which is I don't know kind of lumber. I'm from BC, but I don't know shit about lumber. Sorry, everybody.
It's soft. I imagine.
It's soft and woody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're cutting softwood lumber in America, you have to pay whoever owns the land to cut it. In Canada, you pay the government because the government controls all the softwood lumber, just like with our health insurance. It's like a single payer.
Yeah.
They give you a crazy good rate and they subsidize the fuck out of it. And so now, Americans have been like, this is an unfair advantage that Canadian softwood lumber has. It's so much cheaper than the American ones because the government is subsidizing the cost of taking it out.
Right,
so they're like,
it's like
almost
capitalism
like,
that much?
I know.
You did that.
Right, but it's almost like a reverse tariff, right? It's like, it's like if you're making shoes in your country, but then I'm like going to give you the government gives you $3 on every pair of shoes. It's like your shoes are $3 cheaper. Right. So they say it's like an unfair subsidy, and yeah, I know that they're whiners. They are huge whiners.
Yeah, but they like capitalism so much.
They don't like capitalism that much. They like power and winning. It's like claiming to like the free market only ever lasts as long as you have an advantage. I've never heard anybody be like the free market's great when they're getting fucked by it. I've literally never heard that.
Yeah.
That's part of why that's why it's such an empty ideology. Right. Like people abandon it at the first sign of trouble. Every single time. I've never seen anybody.
And as soon as you're ahead, you're like.
Then it's like I'm sorry. It's the market. It's the way the market works. Yeah, exactly. It's fucking bullshit.
Right.
So anyway, America has taken Canada to court many times over this and lost every time.
Sure.
They're like, no, it's not an unfair subsidy. It's just how it is. Like, that's just the thing.
That's how we run our economy.
And funnily enough, Canada is the most sued nation out of the 3 nations in NAFTA because we have higher regulations and a couple more subsidies, right?
Wipe that dust.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So business in the U.S. are always like, we don't want to make sure that this could, this is not going to kill Canadians because your rules are too hard.
Right.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So sorry. You're saying softwood lumber.
So they want to get rid. America's like, we want to cut these dispute mechanisms out of NAFTA, right? So that we can't like have independent people deciding anymore. If we sue you, you do court in America. Yeah, the face you just made is exactly the face Justin Trudeau was probably making inside while they were talking about, right? Like, so that's one of the things they're fighting about.
Right.
Another thing they're fighting about is, it's so funny, like, because it's so boring. Like, this is why, but it's what I mean. It's like it affects our whole world, but it's boring.
Right.
So one of the things, one of the only things that were left out of NAFTA, which means there's still tariffs on them, are Canadian dairy, poultry, like eggs and sugar. Which are specifically because there was this policy that we still have today called supply management, which is this way of organizing how we do farms in Canada, where essentially you protect like kind of like small scale family based farms, and like you're like, we want our farming industry to still be like a small scale kind of thing. We don't want anyone to get too big, and we don't want to get overwhelmed. So you have tariffs on foreign goods to protect the domestic industry, and then you have quotas on everybody. So each farm can only produce a certain amount. You can't produce more than that, right? So, but it means everyone produces enough to make a profit and live, but nobody produces enough to like dominate the whole industry and kill everybody else.
Sure.
There's a third pillar of supply management too that I can't remember. Anyway, we still have this policy, and because of that stuff wasn't covered in NAFTA, but we pissed off a bunch of Americans very recently because this tricky thing happened where it's like, it's so, I'm sorry, it's like a cliche of an economist right now, because it's like you have to talk about like kinds of milk and like how they're classified and made across the border. So like most milk, because it's dairy, is not it still has tariffs. Most Canadian milk stuff was all being made in Canada, and like Canadian cheese being made with Canadian milk because the tariffs are high on American milk. But there was like this certain kind of milk that was like separated out, this milk product that was still cheaper to make in America. There wasn't a tariff on this particular kind of milk,
right?
Because it like,
we can call it super milk.
Super milk, yeah, because it evaded. It was just like not included in whatever the ones that still had tariffs. This particular milk product was not part of that,
right.
And so because of that, there's actually a huge industry in Wisconsin and like around the Canadian border of dairies who sell this kind of thing into Canada. This is a way that NAFTA was working in America's favor.
Right.
There's a pretty sizable industry that sold this particular kind of milk thing to Canadians.
So wait, what's different about this fucking milk?
It's just like a technical thing about it's had a certain amount of the protein separated out, so it's like this milk byproduct that's used to process other shit, like whatever.
So it's not milk, it's like milk.
It's not just pure milk.
Right.
Yeah. It's like a processed form of milk that wasn't included under the dairy tariff.
Right. Also, if you can count how many times Richard and I have said milk,
in this
episode, you win a very special prize.
But then Canadians did a wily trick when they realized how much like recently the Canadian dairy manufacturers got the Canadian government to like classify a new kind of milk in Canada that competes with this product and allows them to subsidize it and make it cheaper. So they created a new regulatory category in Canada that competes with the milk product coming from America, right, and basically priced them totally out.
So the U.S. like the dairy farmers, they found a loophole, and Canada matched the loophole with like they plugged it with
or rather there was never a loophole in the first place. It was just that this thing didn't have a tariff on it, so people kind of made their businesses selling this thing that didn't have a tariff,
right?
But now Canadians kind of created a loophole to make sure Canadians could outprice the Americans.
Right. It's like a software patch.
Yeah. Except it fucks over all these poor Actually, honestly, does, and this is not sarcasm. Like all these Americans are pissed because they've built their entire livelihoods on selling this milk into Canada, and now the Canadian milk people are like, no, we want that money. Canadian government's going to just create us this new kind of thing, and you're all fucked now. Right. So that's one of the things they're fighting about too, the dairy regulations.
Right.
Donald Trump, he's like, and in Wisconsin, there's very unfair things happening with Canadian dairy. Like this is like a quote that he heard, that he said or something. That's what he's talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like shit like this is what they're fighting about. It's like insanely boring, specific things that are like probably not going to get solved.
Right. Like, so in the instance of the softwood lumber thing, like they meet and they negotiate and they say we want a new system where the independent arbiters aren't involved. Yeah, what they say is we decide it in court in the U.S.
like the accusing nation.
How do they can't strong arm Canada into agreeing to that?
They can't make Canada agree with it, but it's part of the NAFTA that any country can just withdraw.
Right.
So that's the thing, is if they can't get an agreement, they're just going to leave.
They're just going to leave.
And that's the theory. That's a threat.
Right.
Now, there's a number of reasons they would do that, right? It's super unclear if Trump needs Congress to approve leaving or not.
Right.
Nobody actually knows. It's half the people I heard from say that Trump could just do it by himself with the signature, and then half the people are like, no, he'd have to get Congress to do it. There's no way he could just do it. But like, nobody actually knows. It's not clear in the law. It's ambiguous. And in NAFTA itself, it just says like the country has to say it has to want to leave, but it can leave by itself. It doesn't say how America has to figure that shit out for itself, right?
Right.
And so and like I said, it's NAFTA's not the biggest slice of America's trade by any means, so it's maybe not going to fuck that much. It's going to cause a ton of chaos, but it's not going to like punch a huge bleeding hole in America's economy, especially because there's a lot of legal thought that if America pulls out of NAFTA, what's going to happen is the Canada-US free trade agreement is just going to snap immediately back into place, and Mexico's just going to be out, because the Canada-US one, which was the one before NAFTA, never actually got taken away. We just suspended it when NAFTA came into play, and we were like, oh, this is on pause, and we do NAFTA
so it still
instead.
Exists.
It still exists.
Right, waiting in the wings.
It's just on pause. So,
and how do you start that baby up again?
I think the thought is that, I mean, it's a free trade agreement. It's like there's a couple sticky areas where the terms are different between NAFTA and CUFTA,
right?
But not that many, or like most of it is still just free trade. Like the rules are the same,
right? So it just excludes Mexico.
It excludes Mexico, which is, let's face it, would be a huge motivating thing for Trump's base, for him to be able to say that, because Trump's base doesn't really give a fuck about Canada. Maybe the dairy farmers in Wisconsin do, but like most of them are mad at brown people.
Right.
And so for Trump to say like, I excluded Mexico by cutting NAFTA, it's actually a win. Like you could see how that's kind of a win, temporary win for him, especially for someone like him who's dumb, doesn't understand long-term economics, but does understand when people say nice things about him on Fox News, right? Like you could see how that could be an attractive choice for a dumb, insecure man.
Right.
Yeah, so that's like an option. He could just withdraw, and that's kind of where we're at. We're wondering if they're going to withdraw. They had threatened originally that if they can't reach an agreement by the end of 2017, they were going to withdraw. Now they've said they'll wait till at least March. They'll keep negotiating. The next round of negotiations happens in 2 weeks.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And exciting time.
That's where we're at today.
Oh my goodness.
To NAFTA.
That's okay. Well, that's interesting. I don't know what side to root for, really.
I know. Free trade is an interesting thing. The only problem is that it gives all the power to the business owners, the way we have it now, and none to the workers, right? The workers get fucked when it's time to move. Either they get fucked because the leverage of moving your plant to Mexico screws you over and you have to give up your rights and you're always negotiating from a weakened position.
Yeah.
Or your jobs get destroyed and you're just left out in the cold. And I read this great quote that was like, it's socialism for the rich and like nothing for the poor, right? It's like if you're a business owner and you're making all these crazy investments and playing the system and then your business totally fails, the government bails you out, like with the auto industry, right?
Right.
They got a huge bailout during the 2008 crisis and they're affected a lot by, they moved all their shit to Mexico, blah, 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 blah. But for all the workers who are out of a job, they don't get anything. Or they get really tiny pittances in comparison to the fucking CEOs who get their completely bailed out.
Right.
And that's why it's
have been making millions of dollars for
100%.
for decades, and are fine.
Not only do they not need the money to live, they just get their mistake erased.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Right. Interesting.
So that's kind of what's fucked up about it. And if we were gonna tool into something that works for everybody, we need to create a system of. I think the most promising thing I heard is like a system of reinvestment in whatever the local area that you're in is. Because right now, a company can just set up shop, export all this shit, and like have very little obligation to the actual place that their business is in, right? And that's kind of what's inhuman and fucked up about it, is there's no community anymore. And I know that's like such a fucking hippie thing to say, but it is true. There's no like mutual obligation between the workers who are living their lives and these companies who are just kind of setting up shop to have things be cheap. Like Mexico, even though its economy has grown a lot since NAFTA came in, Mexicans still make way less than Americans. They have not developed all the way into a fully developed market economy. They've stalled out too. It's kind of fucked them over too. Right. So like, it's not like their lives dramatically improved from neoliberalism. The same thing happened there that's happening here. The rich got richer and the poor people got kind of fucked. Right. So like, I think if you created a system in which you'd have to give more back to the communities that you're actually working in, or you had some sort of real obligation to them that was not just like bullshit, it's a start.
Right.
But really, redistribution, that's the way to go. To take money from the rich.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
This is very, very interesting. And I say that, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it's like, yeah, it's a very interesting thing for Donald Trump to be doing something that I kind of go like, oh, well, fine.
Yeah.
You know, I hope he doesn't fuck it up too bad, you know?
Yeah, remember that the far left and the far right are reacting to the same problem.
Right.
They're seeing the same problem.
Just a
They just have
different way-
very
different way of
different,
managing it.
yeah, and different explanations.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how things unfold in the next few months here.
We'll NAFTA let you know once things pan out.
Let's hope there's a world.
Yeah, there might not be.
NAFTA.
Oh.
After NAFTA.
Oh.
NAFTA.
Great.
Okay, well, that's very interesting.
What
Richard.
a good pun word. Like, what a gift.
Yeah. It sounds like after.
Yeah, and
HAFTA.
Okay, if you liked this episode, let
Yeah.
us know. Sound off on Twitter at ExplainJamie. Explain to Jamie at gmail.com. SoundCloud, Explain It to Jamie.
Hit us up
Facebook.
on Facebook. Also, please share it on your social
send it to
media.
people.
We love it when that happens, and it's a very small, easy step that you can take to
Helps us out a lot.
help us out. A huge deal.
Your friends who are like, oh, I wish I knew more about politics, send them our shit.
Yeah.
We'd love to.
I
Yeah.
love it. Great. Until next time, I'm Jamie.
I'm Richard.
This has been Explain It to Jamie.